Hello, this is Mark Summers from Summers Technical Services. We're going to finish up our V-block assignment, do a assembly model, and then do a assembly drawing. And that'll wind this thing up. So let's get started. So we're going to start a new assembly model. So we'll say File New. And we've got two assembly templates, one for inch and one for millimeters. All of our parts are inch, so let's make it make sense to make them inch parts. And so now it's asking me, what parts do you want to place in your assembly? So the assembly model has no CAD geometry. You say, wait a minute. Everything is there. All the CAD geometry is in the assembly. No, there is no CAD geometry in the assembly. The CAD data lives in the part models. All the assembly model does is point to the V-block, pull a copy of it in the assembly. It points to the U-clamp, pulls it in, points to the fastener, pulls it in, and it pulls the number of instances. So for the V-block, we got one instance. U-clamp, there's two instances, but it's two instances of the same part model. And so all that CAD data lives in those part models. If you want to change something in the part, you got to go to the part model, open it up, and then change it there, and it will ripple back up to the assembly model, that change will. And then similarly, when you go to the top level from the assembly model, which is the assembly drawing, if you update this part model, it updates the assembly model, and then it also updates the assembly drawing. And so this is the whole idea behind parametric CAD modeling, is you don't have like an AutoCAD drawing where you got all those lines and things, you got to move everything around independently. You change one thing, it updates another. That's the meaning of parametric. And so let's see if I can find my part. So it's asking me for the first part. You always want to place the first part that relates to the first part that you would grab onto if you're building this thing in your garage. What's the first part you would grab? Well, you wouldn't grab that little fastener first, because you have the fastener, and it's like, what do I do with it? Well, I got to lay it on the table. That's not where it goes. Everything bolts to that. Everything mounts to that V-block. So it makes perfect sense to put that in first. So that's our -1 part. That's why I called it -1, because it's the first part. And I'll say open, and I'll place it on the screen. Now let's place another part. Insert components. I'll go browse, and let's go find the -3 part. And I'll put one of those in here, and you see I've got really beautiful colors, which you should do on yours. And I'll place the third one, which is the -5, which is right here. All right, so there's my 3 instances of the CAD data. Now I want 2 of these guys, and so I could go back to Insert Components and find it, replace another one. Or I can Control-click and drag this one over here and get another one. Now I've got 2 instances. And I can click and drag this one and I get another instance. So now I've got these items in my tree. These are the instances. There's the V-block. There's the first U-block. And there's the second U-block. Well, I can reorder these things. And so I want to keep my -3s together. So I want to drag this one up. And there it is. -1, -3, -3, and there's 2 -5s. So that order makes sense to me. So the first thing you're going to do after you get all your parts in here is see that F on there? That means it's fixed. It cannot move. And that seemed like a good thing, but it's a horrible thing. These other parts can move because they still have their minus sign in front of them. They still have all their 6 degrees of freedom loose. This one can't move. It's fixed, but it's only fixed where you happen to click on the screen. And you'll look at these assembly planes, and they are in some location that's not related to that first part. I want my part to lie on top of those assembly planes so that when it gets used in the next higher level assembly, it will be at a logical location on these planes. So your first part you place, you right click and you float it, and that will get rid of those constraints and release all 6 degrees of freedom. So once we float it, that F on the tree is going to go away. Now it's a minus sign, and now it's loose. So if we open up the tree on each one of these parts, we'll see all the features of that tree, including the part planes. So what I want to do is I want to mate the assembly plane with these part planes. And the way that I do that is select the assembly plane, control click the part plane. Now both are selected, and I'm on the assembly tab, and I hit the mate constraint. And now those planes are lined up. If I don't like the orientation, I can flip the mate to make it anti-aligned. It's still mated, it just flipped 180 degrees. But the way I had it was correct, so I'm going to go back. And I can actually do an offset. If I wanted to offset 2.7 inches, those planes are offset by that amount. I can also do angular offsets. But I don't want that. I want this thing to be coincident. I want it to be lined up exactly on top of that plane, and so I'm going to leave it there and say OK, OK. Now I need to do the next plane, which is top, control click top, assembly plane to part plane, mate those together. OK, OK. So every one of these planar mates gets rid of 3 degrees of freedom. There's 6 free to start with. The first plane gets rid of 3. The second planar mate gets rid of 2. And now it can only move in one direction. It's only got 1 loose degree of freedom, and this last planar mate will take care of that. So now once I do that, it can no longer move, and I know that, and I get an indication of that because my minus sign on my part is no longer minus. It's gone. So that part is tied down. Now let's tie down this first U-clamp. Well, this thing is designed, the design intent is that these parts are all symmetric about this vertical plane, and so this thing needs to be located. I can locate it with that plane. I could try to locate other faces and features, but I always like to tie these things down to something that's very high on the tree, and there's nothing higher on this part tree than these part planes. And so I want to go back to my ISO view. I want to take advantage of that by grabbing the front plane of the assembly. Excuse me, I'm not going to do the assembly plane. What tells this part where to go? Well, this red part tells the green part where to go. So I want to tell the plane of this part and the plane of this part to line up. So there's my V block. I want to grab the front plane of the V block, and I'm going to grab the front plane of the U-clamp and mate those together. All right. Now I'm going to think about what locates this thing in the other 2 directions. Well, what locates it up and down is that this screw comes down. There's eventually going to be a pipe here. And when I screw that faster down, it's going to lift that U-clamp up until what happens? Until this face kisses off on that face. And so in this case, I want to mate those 2 planes together. So I want to spin this thing around. I want this face, control click that face. I want to mate those together. And let's see what that looks like. Now it's centered. It's centered left and right because of that first planar mate. Now this thing is touching down here. Now the only thing I got left to do is figure out where it goes this way. Well, this thing is designed to float in between these 2 guys here. And so what I think I want to do is I think I want to put it in the center of this thing. And so if I knew how far it was the center of here to here, I could do a planar mate between that plane there and the plane on my part here. And so let's find out what that distance is. I'm going to go evaluate, measure, and I'm going to remember that the length of this part here is whatever the length of this edge is, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is 4 inches, but we'll check. Measure. I want to know the distance. I want to know the length of that line. It's 4 inches, and I want to right-click Clear Selections. And I also want to know how far it is from here to here. So that's 1 1/4. All right, so what I want to do is I want to mate the plane between the V block, the mid plane there. I want to mate it to the mid plane right here. Remember, I made that plane go right through the middle of that part. I made it extrude mid plane. That was a strategically smart move. And now I want to mate those together. So I got them both selected. Assembly, mate. except I want this to be offset. So I'll come down to this dimension here, and I want it to be offset 2, or 4 divided by 2. That gets me out to here, and then I need to minus 1.25 divided by 2. That'll give me the midpoint of that face there. And now, that's a nice place to put that thing. It's right centered on that piece of the part. And I'll say, okay, okay. And now that's the third plane, and so now that part is successfully mated. And so I'm going to do the same thing on this guy, put him over here. Now let's put this guy on here. Well, what tells him where to go? Well, the green part tells the blue part where to go. And that's why I put it in the order I did. And so now I'm going to select this feature, control-click that cylindrical feature. So now I've got 2 cylindrical features located, and I want to say mate. And now that's going to mate together right there. It can still go up and down, and it can still spin. See, it can still spin. So it's still got 3 degrees of freedom left. Up and down, spinning. Whoop, let go. And so it's still got degrees of freedom left. I won't know how far this thing goes down until we pick a Schedule 40 pipe to put in here. The idea is there's going to be a pipe in here. This thing screws down and clamps against that pipe and holds it in the V-block. And that's what lifts this green part up. And so I want to make a tangent. I'm eventually going to make a tangent constraint between here and the pipe to make that magic happen. And I'll show you how to do that in class. So you do the same thing on these other 2 parts. Locate this one to the red part just like we did. Locate the blue one to the red part. Or excuse me, this blue one, this instance of the dash 5 to this instance of the dash 3. And then we'll have our assembly. So now that we've finished up, you can finish this thing up. Now we got the drawing to do. So let's pause this video, let you finish up the assembly, and we'll start the assembly drawing next.